Hey everyone, thanks for joining me. My name is Brian Matiash, and in this video I'd like to go over some new features that were introduced yesterday when Adobe released Lightroom CC, which is Lightroom Creative Cloud, or Lightroom 6, depending on whether you subscribe to Creative Cloud or you purchased the kind of standalone version. Now, before we begin, what I'd like to do is talk a little bit about the photos. So you can see here there are 8, 9, 10, 11 photos that are clearly a pano. If you open up the photo here, you'll see kind of as we go along, you see how I kind of pivoted. Now you'll also notice that there's this kind of curve in the earth because my camera was not perfectly level at the time, which is fine. I'm not necessarily going for a specific thing here other than I just want to outline some of the cool new features. Now, the first thing I'm going to do before anything, I noticed that there's this kind of dust spot right over here. So I'm going to get rid of that. And this is something that it's not new to Lightroom 6, but it's worth showing. So what I'm going to do is go to the Develop module and then select here the spot removal tool. And then I'm going to increase the spot size and just heal that right there. There was a little spot. Now, watch, let me go back into the Loupe View. As I go over, you'll see that spot is in the exact same area on each of the images. It's right over there. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to select that first image where I fixed the spot. I'll select the rest of the images, and then I'm going to go to the bottom here and select Sync Settings. Now you'll see everything here is selected, which I don't want. So I'm just going to select the Check None button, which deselects everything. And then I'm going to select Spot Removal. What that's going to do is it's going to synchronize that particular spot removal across all of the different images. So if I go back, that spot is now gone. So it's one of those things where if you have a spot on your sensor or multiple spots and you know that they're in the same location across multiple images, it's a really easy way to knock that out. All right, so that, again, that wasn't independent, or that was not new to Lightroom CC or Lightroom 6. What is new, here's a small little thing that's new. I particularly like this. I'm gonna bring up the Loupe View, which shows information about each frame. And so you can see here that the first thing I show are the common settings of the exposure, so shutter speed, aperture, ISO. What's new to Lightroom CC and Lightroom 6 is this ability to show not only the camera, not only the lens, but the focal length of the lens. So to get that, what you'll do is you'll go to View from the menu, you'll go to View Options, and I believe this is the same on Windows. And you'll have under the Loupe View tab 3 different drop downs, and each drop down, each line corresponds to the 3 lines over here. The new setting that you'll have here are camera and lens, which just shows you the camera and the lens, or camera and lens settings, which shows you the camera, the lens, and the focal length. And then I also have the date and time just because I like to know when the photo was taken. So this is just something, a little thing that was new, figured to be worth bringing up. All right, so one of the things, we'll close out of here for now. One of the things that I wanted to introduce that's new to Lightroom CC is the ability to auto stitch. There are 2 new auto compositions that Lightroom will do. One is an auto HDR. If you have multiple exposures that are bracketed and you want to tone map it, Lightroom can do that now without having to leave to go to a third-party program or to Photoshop. The other is an auto stitch pano, which will automatically stitch the panos. And so you'll see here, watch, if I kind of go across, again, we're basically looking at the different brackets for this stitch. And again, what we have here is we have a Sony a7S with the ultra zoom 70 to 400 millimeter A-mount telephoto lens, and it was taken at 210 millimeters. Now, I took these photos in Death Valley National Park, specifically at the Mesquite Dunes. And if you zoom in a bit, you'll see kind of the dunes start to take shape. Now, we were actually kind of out here. We were somewhere over here. The main parking area is right here. This is where you turn off. And we kind of walked, actually we parked a little bit further and walked up here. The reason is typically in this general area, this big swath, there are tons of people, and where there are people, there are footprints. And if it's not windy that day, then those footprints will stay in the sand. If there's a lot of wind blowing, then that will typically get rid of the footprints. So we were over here shooting towards, I'll zoom out. We were kind of shooting, so we were, again, in this area, shooting around this mountain range. So if I go to the library view, you'll see there's that mountain range that I'm talking about. And it was, this was taken just around sunset, so you could see the beautiful colors. It was during the winter, so the sun was setting really early. All right, so now let's go ahead and actually get this to stitch. It's pretty simple. All you have to do is select all of the images and then right-click, and you'll see a new menu item called Photo Merge. And under here are the two different options that I mentioned, HDR and Panorama. Now, if you select Panorama, a dialog box will appear. And what's going to happen is Lightroom's going to generate a lower res preview. If it was a full res, it would take a lot more time. But this takes about 10 seconds or so to render. And so you can see here, here's the render of our pano. And as I mentioned, it's kind of curving, which is fine. Again, this is more for illustrative purposes. What is kind of frustrating, again, this is Lightroom CC, Lightroom 6.0. There have been no maintenance releases or updates or patches. And this is kind of something that's odd. As far as I can tell, you can't zoom. There's no ability to kind of get closer. If I double click, there's nothing in the window menu that allows me to kind of, the zoom there doesn't do anything. So there's really nothing to do. You get a very kind of low, literally very low res, small preview. On the right here, you have several options, though, that are pretty straightforward. The first is auto select projection. So basically there are three different types of projections. There's spherical, there's cylindrical, and then there's perspective. And perspective is actually not bad. It straightens the horizon out, but it stretches the mountains. I'm actually gonna, I think for this I'm gonna go with that, because if we go to spherical, you can see how it really curves. It maintains more of the perspective of the mountains, but here what I can do is, I think I can rotate. Actually, you know what? I'm gonna keep it at spherical, because my concern is if I rotate, I'm gonna lose all of the foreground in this area here as I rotate counterclockwise. So we'll just keep it at spherical. Now, auto crop, I'm gonna deselect that. You know, when you, especially when you take a series of brackets for a pano and you're not perfectly level and your camera is not set at the proper nodal point, you tend to get this kind of, the stitching algorithm has to rotate and transform each of the photos to make them align properly. And what that results in are these kind of dead areas. Now you could, take a stab at using some sort of content-aware fill, but for me, there's nothing here that I'm really missing. So what auto crop will do is it'll automatically crop in until all of those dead areas are hidden. And so when you're done here, you can hit merge, and that will begin the process. But I've already done the merge. It took about, so this was 11, 12 megapixel files, which forms about a 90 megapixel image. It took me about 2.5 minutes to run. And just to kind of give you an idea just for comparison's sake. So this is a current generation Mac Pro. It's that little black trash can looking computer. And it's pretty beefy. It's got 6-core Intel Xeon processor at 3.5 gigahertz clock speed. And it has 64 gigs of RAM. And what's important to note is this right here, which is the dedicated graphics cards. Lightroom 6, one of the big improvements, huge improvements, is that it now supports GPUs or graphics processor units. So what that means is things especially like the sliders in the basic module and a few other sliders run a lot faster than it ever has before. So it's a pretty beefy computer, and it took about 2.5 minutes. So again, just if you're doing these really large, especially larger like 36 megapixel files, just remember that it might take some time. So I'm going to cancel out of here, but I want to show you something, a quick kind of cool tip. This actually, my wife told me about this yesterday. So let's say you have a bunch of panos. You know, you've got these, and let's say you have a few more. And you don't want to have to go through that dialog box. And this is the same for HDR. Let's say you have a bunch of brackets that you want to just tone map. What you do is, if you select the brackets, you right click and you go to photo merge. If you press and hold the shift key while selecting this, so again, I'm pressing and holding the shift key, you see a change. What will happen is it'll automatically start stitching or tone mapping without bringing up that dialog box. Basically it's going to use the last settings that you had, so like auto crop, and if you had the auto projection selection, it'll just use those and it'll do the stitching without bringing it up. So it's just one of those things where if you just need to bust them out quickly, you can. So let's go ahead here. I'm going to bring the stitched pano that I already created and we'll start working on it. All right, so here is that stitched pano. You can see it did a really nice job. This is pretty much straight out of camera. The only thing we did was we got rid of the dust spot, but I haven't done anything else. You can see that what happens is when you do a tone mapped HDR or a pano, Lightroom puts out a DNG file, which is Adobe's digital negative or their kind of raw format, which is pretty cool. It's not a TIFF file, it's a 16-bit DNG. You can see that the resolution here equals about 90 megapixels, almost 90.5 megapixels. It shows the full dimensions and the crop dimensions. Remember, we had auto crop on, so there's actually a little bit less pixels. But here's what's cool. If you press R, you can see we actually still retain those dead areas that I mentioned. So they're still there for you to do what you want in case you want to take a swing at doing some sort of ContentAware Fill. All right, so what we're going to do first before anything is I'm going to try to straighten the horizon. I'm going to straighten it to right around here, you know, for this area. So I'm just going to kind of maneuver it this way, and I'm going to drop it in because we're in the dead areas here. I'll bring this in just a bit, and I'll continue rotating. So something like around here. I'm kind of looking at this as my horizon line, and we're looking pretty good. Let's go out there. So that's good. Nice kind of wide swath. And that works out pretty well. Now, let me actually go ahead. If you press I don't know if I brought this up earlier, but to bring up the Loupe View, just press I, and that'll toggle between them. So I'm going to hide them for a little bit less of a distraction. Now, if we start at the top, you can see that the histogram, there's a little bit of a gap from the edge of the data to the end of the histogram, which is where you would start blowing out highlights. To fix that, I'm going to take my white slider for the white point. I'm going to bring it over. All right, so you can see just in that respect, I'm just going to hit the backslash key, which is above the enter or return key, to show you a before and after preview. So that's basically it. Just adjusting the white slider. Now the next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to scroll all the way down, and under the camera calibration, you'll see that there's a profile, and pretty much the standard, unless you've changed this manually, is always going to be Adobe standard. Now, because this was shot as a DNG or a RAW file, it preserves all of the camera RAW profiles. And all I'm going to do here is go to camera standard. So this is Sony's standard profile, and what it does is it brings a little bit more color into the image. And that's about it. You'll also see that the histogram was adjusted a bit. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to bring the black slider down a bit and the white slider over, just to kind of spread out the histogram. I'm also going to increase the overall brightness. All right, so that's right here pretty much kind of evenly laid out in terms of tonality photo. But what I want to do is I really want to bring out some more details in the sky. The sky just looked beautiful. And so to do that, I'm going to go to the graduated filter tool, which is right up here. I'm going to select it. And I'm going to start by selecting exposure. That'll be the first variable I want to adjust. So I'm going to actually bring the exposure down. And I'm going to also want to make sure that I have an increase in contrast. an increase in clarity, and an increase in saturation. And I might also want it to be a little bit warmer, because you can see that it's already warm. It has some natural warm colors from the sunset. And so what I'm going to do is I'm going to drop this down. And you can see, I don't know if you can, now it depends. I know from using Lightroom 5, this was never as fluid. So this control is very, very fluid. And that's thanks again to the GPU support. And I'll break for a second to show you about that. To make sure that you're actually taking advantage of GPU support, if you go to Lightroom and then Preferences, go to the Performance button here, or the Performance tab, and make sure that you have Graphics Processor is selected. And you can see how it lists mine. All right, so we're back here, and again, you can see I'll press the H key. What I've done was I essentially brought out a lot more detail in the sky. Now, I'm going to press H to hide this, and here's where Lightroom 6 or Lightroom CC has improved. Now, historically with the Lightroom 5, this would be the end of the story. You drop your ND filter or your graduated filter, and that's it. The problem is that I don't want the warming, the darkening, the increase in contrast, the increase in clarity, the increase in saturation to apply to the mountains. I just want it to apply to the sky. But because, again, the filter also covers the foreground, what I want to do is I just want it to apply to the sky. And so new to Lightroom CC is this button here called Brush. This was not here before. And so if I select it, you have this new kind of brush section in the graduated filter pane. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to select Erase. And I'm going to make sure that Auto Mask is selected. I'm going to bring the flow up to 100. So that's essentially, this flow is essentially the strength of the brush. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to start brushing, and you can see how it's essentially removing the neutral density effect from, or not the graduated filter. I'm so used to saying neutral density. From this area, you see how the sky is maintaining that effect, but it's removing from the mountain. And so I'm going to start first just by kind of going along the edge here. And because the Auto Mask checkbox is selected, I don't have to worry about the effect spilling over into the sky or onto the sky. It's just kind of making sure I get everything here. Keep going up here. Brushwork is never the most exciting thing. But you want to make sure that you kind of get a clean edge. Otherwise, it just doesn't look very right. And so I'm using a combination of the hard edge and the feather to give me a good selection with these brush strokes. Okay, so with that done, I'm just kind of gonna go across it one more time. I'm going to deselect Auto Mask because I only want Auto Mask for this horizon line, and I'm going to increase this brush size and just kind of remove it, make sure that it's removed from the rest of the foreground. Because remember, the graduated filter kind of permeated through almost to the bottom of the frame. And so you can see now, I was able to really easily remove the graduated effect from the foreground. Even though it technically spilled over, it's not there anymore. And so you can see if I kind of continue to drop that exposure, it's only affecting the sky. And so from here, I'm going to continue. I'm going to increase, I'm going to decrease the highlights a bit and increase the clarity some more and increase the saturation. So it's just looking really nice. All right, so we're going to close out of there. That again is new. Actually, what I'm going to do here I'm going to use another graduated filter. I'm going to go back to exposure. I'm going to increase the exposure this time. I'm going to increase the warmth a bit, and I'm going to increase the saturation. And I basically want to brighten the foreground. It's kind of dead. But I'm going to bring this down here, and I'm going to increase the exposure a bit more. See how the foreground is coming out, but again, we're getting this kind of spillover onto the mountain. So just like before, we're going to take the brush again, select Erase, select Auto Mask, and then I'm just going to kind of go here. I don't mind if that ground gets, let me bring the brush size down a bit. I don't mind if a little bit of ground and sand get darkened. but I don't want the mountain to be as bright as it is. So we're just kind of going along here, and you see how it's kind of keeping to that horizon line. All right, now let's turn auto mask off and increase the brush size, and we're just going to make sure that we get any trace of that effect. All right, there we go. So now again, I can go back and I can increase the brightness of that foreground some more. It's doing a really nice job. And I think I will bring out the shadows a bit there. All right, much brighter. So now we're done with this tool. Now let's go and do some global adjustments. So I haven't increased any contrast. I'm going to bring that contrast out. I'm going to bring the black point down a bit more, also to add some more contrast. Now let's add some clarity globally and a little bit of vibrance, but it's getting a bit too colorful here, and especially in the mountains, kind of getting that kind of rain shadow, that blue shadow. And so what I'm going to do is I'm actually going to go to the Hue, Saturation, and Luminance, or HSL pane, and I'm going to go to the Saturation Target Adjustment tool, which is right over here. I'm going to put it over here. Now, take a look at these colors here. You see how as I move around the screen, basically what's happening is whatever color this Target Adjustment tool highlights will be represented here. So here it's blue. I'm going to drop the saturation of that, kind of right around there. And I'm going to also drop the luminance of it a bit. So what it's doing is it's actually darkening the mountain, which is fine. And then I'm going to put the Target Adjustment tool back, and there we're good. You know, we're looking pretty good there. Next up, I'm going to go to split toning, and what I'd like to do is add a little bit of a warmth to the highlights. To do that, I'm going to start by going to the hue slider of the highlights. So the way split toning works is you can assign a hue or a color to the highlights and to the shadows of your image. The way that I work with split toning is what you want to do is you want to press and hold the Option key on a Mac or the Alt key on a PC. Make sure you're pressing and holding it. And you'll know you're holding it because highlights will turn into reset highlights. So while you're pressing the Option or Alt key, you see here as you drag along, it's showing the color that the hue slider is hovering over. So I want it to be kind of close to yellow, right around there. And what that did was, holding the Option or Alt key, essentially what it did was it simulated as if the saturation slider was all the way to 100%. So it gave you a full view. Now we don't want that. Actually, what I just want is just, you know, something maybe around there. 16, maybe a little bit more. There, that's good. And for the shadows, I'm going to do the same thing. I'm going to bring it over to the blues, right around there, and I'm going to add a little bit of a blue color. This is very typical, this kind of warm, cool split tone that you'll see a lot in images. Now we're almost done. What I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead and zoom in. I'm going to apply sharpening, and when I apply sharpening, I like to zoom in. And so you could see we zoomed in on a 90 megapixel image, so it goes way in. Just like with split toning, I like to press and hold the Option key on a Mac or the Alt key on a PC with the amount slider. And what happens is when you select that, the image turns grayscale. And that's because it's much easier to see sharpening effects on a grayscale image. And so I'm increasing the amount, and you can kind of start to see the mountain snap into place, but you want to kind of back off just at the point where you see it's getting a bit too crispy. So right around there. And then what I'm also going to do is mask out sharpening from areas that don't need it, specifically the sky. You typically don't want to sharpen a flat part of an image like the sky. And so just like before, press and hold the Option or Alt key on the masking slider. And as you drag over, you'll see areas start turning black. And again, most of it is in the sky. And that's because those areas that are black are having the sharpening masked out. You don't want it there. Basically, you just want sharpening typically on hard edges, like the horizon line. So we've got that going on. Now I can see here, I actually want to bring out the saturation in the foreground a bit more. I'm actually going to go to the Saturation Target Adjustment tool, and I'm gonna go to green. I'm gonna increase that saturation. I really want it to pop. So you can see how it got much more saturated. I'm also gonna increase the luminance of it so it gets a little bit brighter. All right, that's good. Let's put that back there. All right, so we took care of that. We got our sharpening. Last thing I'm gonna do is go to the post-crop vignette. So I want to kind of darken or burn the edges. Now, by default, the style of a vignette is highlight priority, which means it's gonna look to protect highlights. But I actually want to select color priority as the option here because I want to make sure that the colors are maintained. So I'm just going to start darkening here. Then I'm going to bring the midpoint slider to the left, which brings the vignette closer to the center. And then finally, I'm going to increase the feather, which makes it a bit more of a gradual shift. And so here is, this is what we were able to do with Lightroom 6. And so let's go ahead and we'll hit the backslash key, which is above the enter or return key. So that's what we started with. Again, we were able to use Lightroom CC to take 11 images and stitch them into one. And then using a bunch of new tools, specifically the brush tool for the graduated filter. It's also available for the radial filter, just as a FYI. But we use it for the graduated filter to essentially remove the effect from the mountain. We darkened the sky and we made it, you know, more colorful and added clarity and contrast. We also increased the brightness and saturation of the foreground, and we were able to do them kind of independently of the mountain itself. So these are some of the tools that were introduced in Lightroom 6. For my next video, we're actually going to take a look at using Lightroom 6 to do an auto HDR and see how that works compared to some of the other tone mapping utilities. So I hope you found this useful. Be sure, if you have any questions, leave them in the comments field, and I look forward to seeing you next time on our next video. Thanks a lot.